Most pastors don't feel guilty because they've done something wrong. They feel guilty because they've wanted something human: rest, joy, margin, presence, a livable income, time with their spouse, energy for their kids. And somewhere along the way, they were taught, explicitly or implicitly, that wanting those things meant that they were less spiritual. If you're a pastor, listen to this. Let me ask you a few quiet questions, okay? Have you ever felt guilty for wanting a day off you didn't have to justify? Wanting to stop answering text late into the night? Wanting to enjoy your life without explaining it? Wanting financial stability without feeling worldly? Wanting your kids to remember you're present, not exhausted? If so, you're not broken. You're responding to a system that has confused holiness with depletion. Now let's name something clearly. This guilt did not come from Jesus. It came from unexamined theology, church cultures built on constant availability, leadership models borrowed from corporate grind culture, revival movements that celebrated sacrifice but ignored sustainability. Many pastors learned early on, if you're tired, that means you're faithful. If your family is strained, that's just the cost of your calling. If you want more, check your heart. And so pastors stopped listening to their bodies, their marriages, their children, their limits, not because they didn't care, but because they cared too much. Guys, I carried this guilt for years. I felt guilty when I slowed down, guilty when I rested, guilty when I questioned the pace, guilty when I wanted joy that wasn't tied to ministry success. I thought something was wrong with me. What I didn't realize was that I had been discipled into a version of Christianity that could save souls but neglect people, including myself. And here's the lie that sits underneath all of this guilt. God is pleased with you only when you're pouring yourself out. But Jesus never taught that, guys. He taught abide, remain, come away, rest, receive. And somewhere along the way, pastors were told to preach union while living disconnection. And that dissonance will eventually break you. Guys, this guilt, it doesn't just exhaust pastors. It really keeps them silent, keeps them isolated, keeps them from asking for help, keeps them trapped in unsustainable patterns. Worst of all, it keeps them from imagining a better way, because guilt says you should be grateful, stop wanting more. But Jesus never shamed people for wanting life. He promised abundant life. And when I say a better life, I'm not talking about luxury. I'm not opposed to that, but that's not where I'm limiting this conversation. I'm talking about a nervous system that can calm down and breathe, a marriage that feels safe, children who feel prioritized, leadership that flows from peace, provision that removes constant fear. Guys, that's not selfish. Now, I want to talk about how sacrifice in our modern day ministry culture really becomes spiritualized neglect. So I want to tread carefully here because sacrifice matters. Sacrifice is central to the Christian story. Love costs something. Faithfulness requires surrender. But somewhere along the way, we stopped asking an important question. What kind of sacrifice did Jesus actually model? Because not every form of loss is holiness, and not every exhausted life is faithfulness. See, most pastors don't wake up one day and decide to neglect themselves or their family. It happens slowly. A late night here, a missed dinner there, a boundary bent just this once, okay? A crisis that becomes the new normal. And over time, sacrifice stops being something you choose. It becomes something you're trapped inside of. And that's when sacrifice quietly turns into neglect. And neglect gets baptized with spiritual language. Spiritualized neglect sounds holy, but it leaves wreckage. It says things like, this is just a busy season. Yeah, that never ends. Well, my family understands it's ministry. God comes first. Everything else falls into place. I'll rest after this next push. This is just the cost of the calling. But here's the truth most pastors are afraid to say out loud. If the calling consistently destroys what God entrusted to you, then something is misaligned. So let's talk honestly about family for a moment. Most pastors' kids don't resent the church because of theology. They resent it because it got the best of their parents. It always came first. It never slowed down. Many spouses don't leave pastors because they lack faith. They leave because they felt invisible. And that's not condemnation. That's grief. And grief deserves truth, not slogans. Jesus did lay down his life, but he did not live a life of constant depletion. And mind you, Jesus wasn't married. So notice this. Jesus withdrew often. Jesus rested publicly. Jesus disappointed crowds. Jesus said no. Jesus protected his inner circle. Jesus did not heal everyone. He was not driven by demand. He was anchored in communion with the Father. The cross was a moment of sacrifice, not a lifestyle of neglect. And that distinction matters. True sacrifice has an object. It's love. But when sacrifice becomes detached from love, when it's driven by fear, the approval of man, or the fear of man, or pressure, it becomes destructive. And many pastors aren't laying down their lives for love. They're laying down their lives to survive expectations. And that's not the gospel. And here's something uncomfortable, but it's important to name, okay? Some systems quietly benefit when pastors neglect themselves. Systems that reward constant availability, measure success by output, confuse busyness with fruitfulness, depend on pastors overextending themselves. These systems don't need to be evil to be harmful. They simply need to remain unchallenged, and guilt keeps them unchallenged. You were never asked to sacrifice your marriage, your children, your mental health, your physical body, your joy, your humanity. You were asked to surrender your ego, not your nervous system. You were asked to lay down self-centered ambition, not embodied life. And those are not the same thing. So here's a question every pastor eventually has to ask. Who is benefiting from the way that I'm currently sacrificing? If the answer is fear, expectations, image, institutional pressure, then it's time to pause, not quit, pause, and listen again to the shepherd who said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." See, healthy sacrifice is chosen, not coerced. It's seasonal, not constant. It leads to life, not resentment. It produces fruit and not fragmentation. It's rooted in trust, not anxiety. And it always leaves room for rest. And if you've been listening closely, you might be thinking, but Jesus laid his life down. But Jesus carried the weight of the world. But Jesus was constantly giving himself away. Yes, and still, Jesus did not live hurried. And that matters more than we realize. Many pastors unknowingly carry an image of Jesus that looks like this: always on the move, always responding, always needed, always urgent. But that Jesus doesn't actually exist in the Gospels. What exists is something far more disruptive to our modern day assumptions. Jesus walked everywhere. I want you to let that land. Jesus walked everywhere. He didn't rush. He didn't optimize. He didn't scale. He didn't multitask. He walked at the pace of conversation, at the pace of interruption, at the pace of children keeping up, at the pace of grief and curiosity. And while he walked, the kingdom came. I love what my friend Jason Clark said the other day when we did a podcast together. He said, we move at the pace of relationship. Guys, some of the most powerful moments, even in the Gospels, were while Jesus is walking, it was the interruptions. A woman reaches for his garment. A blind man cries out. A child is brought to him. A grieving father pleads for help. And Jesus does not resent interruptions. He receives them. Why? Because he was not driven by efficiency. He was anchored in the presence of the Father. Guys, this part is important for pastors. Jesus regularly disappointed expectations. He left crowds unhealed. He walked away from popularity. He refused to perform on demand. He declined opportunities that looked strategic. At one point, the disciples are frantic because everyone's looking for him. And Jesus responds not with urgency, but with direction. He chooses what's next based on communion, not demand. Jesus withdrew constantly, not after burnout, not as recovery, but as a rhythm. He withdrew from crowds, from pressure, from success, from demand. Silence wasn't collapse. Silence for Jesus was alignment. And most pastors withdraw only when they're depleted. See, Jesus withdrew to stay whole. And here's something rarely said. Jesus protected his interior life fiercely. He didn't explain himself to everyone. He didn't give equal access to all. He didn't let the loudest voice decide his schedule. He lived from the inside out. And friend, that's not selfish. That's how love stays grounded. Most pastors don't struggle because they don't love Jesus. They struggle because they're trying to follow Jesus while living at a pace that he never modeled. And pace is not neutral. Speed shapes the soul. A hurried life cannot sustain love. Hurry shortens patience. It flattens discernment, reduces people to problems, turns prayer into preparation, turns sermons into output, turns presence into performance. And pastors often confuse that numbness with maturity. Guys, it's not maturity, it's survival. And Jesus never counted attendance. Never, not one time. Jesus never counted attendance. And pastors often confuse that numbness with maturity. Friend, it's not maturity, it's survival. See, Jesus never counted attendance, influence, reach, engagement, growth charts. He looked for faith, love, trust, fruit that remains. Guys, Jesus played the long game, and shepherds are long game leaders. The invitation of Jesus has not changed, friend. It is not keep up, do more, try harder. It's come, abide, remain, follow me. At his pace, guys, it's amazing. You don't have to frantically keep up with everything. You get to remain with him, follow him, and be led by the Spirit. So here's a question worth setting with. If Jesus lived at the pace that I'm living, would his ministry have looked the same? And if the answer is no, then something needs to change. Not your calling, your pace. Guys, I want to slow this down even more because what we're about to talk about isn't abstract. It's not theoretical. It's not theological debate. It's human cost. And most pastors carry this cost silently. And we don't talk about the cost because pastors are expected to be resilient, strong, faith-filled, always okay. There's an unspoken rule in ministry culture. You can struggle, but only privately and only briefly. So pastors learn to manage pain instead of name it. But pain that is unnamed does not disappear. It just simply relocates. And one of the first places this shows up is inside. Pastors begin to feel emotionally flat. spiritually tired, easily irritated, disconnected from joy, afraid of slowing down. Prayer becomes functional. Scripture becomes material. Silence feels threatening, not because God has left, but because the soul has been overworked. And many pastors haven't lost faith. They've lost access to themselves. So guys, I want to speak next plainly about marriage. See, most pastors' spouses, they don't expect nor do they want perfection. They just want their husband or their spouse to be present. But presence is impossible when ministry always comes first, when conversations are always rushed, when emotional energy is gone. The phone never stops buzzing, and many spouses feel like they're competing with a calling they didn't choose. And many pastors don't realize the distance until it's wide. Not because they didn't care, but because exhaustion numbed awareness. Now, even with children, children don't measure faithfulness the way institutions do. They measure it in moments. Who came to the game? Who listened at bedtime? Who wasn't distracted? Who laughed? Who was available? Many pastors' kids grow up believing God always needed my parent more than I did. That belief doesn't always turn into rebellion. Sometimes it turns into quiet resentment. Sometimes it turns into distance. Sometimes it turns into repeating the same pattern. But then let's move on to the body, the physical body. Guys, the body keeps score. Chronic stress doesn't stay spiritual. It eventually becomes anxiety, insomnia, autoimmune issues, digestive problems, fatigue, depression. Many pastors spiritualize symptoms their bodies are begging them to listen to. Guys, your body is not your enemy. It's your early warning system. When pastors live depleted lives, discernment weakens. Everything feels urgent. Every request feels critical. Every conflict feels personal. Decision-making becomes reactive. Boundaries feel they literally feel selfish. I know this, guys. I've walked through this. Vision narrows to survival. And we're not talking about moral failure here. This is nervous system overload. So here's the part that often breaks pastors open. Your life is teaching even when your sermons aren't. Guys, people learn from your pace, your availability, your anxiety, your joy, your marriage, your exhaustion. See, shepherds set the emotional temperature of a community. An anxious shepherd produces anxious sheep. A peaceful shepherd produces trust. Many pastors carry a grief they've never voiced. Grief over lost years, missed moments, strained relationships, unlived joy, a self they barely recognize. And friend, that grief is not accusation. It's an invitation. An invitation to stop pretending nothing has been lost and start asking what can still be redeemed. And here's the good news, friend. Redemption does not require burning everything down. It begins with honesty, slowing down, reordering loves and lives, listening again, making small, brave changes. You don't need a new calling. You need a new way of carrying the one you already have. And so next, I want to offer something hopeful. Not a fix, not a formula, but a better blueprint, a way of life rooted in union with God, being present and presence with family, wisdom over urgency, provision without fear. Guys, a shepherd's life that can actually last. So stay with me. Okay, now before we keep going, I want to share something personal with you. A few years ago, I wrote a book called The Shepherd's Tent. I didn't write it as a theology project. I wrote it as a wounded pastor trying to survive. It tells the story of how I came out of the busyness and pressure and performance of ministry and slowly rediscovered the joy of union with Jesus. Not hype, not grind, not striving, but a quieter, truer way of being a shepherd. Guys, this book is for pastors who love God deeply but feel tired, scattered, or disconnected inside. It's for leaders who want to slow down without quitting, rediscover joy without guilt, and to lead from wholeness instead of exhaustion. So if anything I've said so far has resonated with you, this book will feel like a companion, someone walking with you, not preaching at you. So you can find the Shepherd's Tent wherever books are sold, and I'll also include a link into the show notes below. My prayer is that it gives you language for what you've been feeling and permission to come home again in the presence of Abba. And if you're a pastor who's already creating wisdom every week and you're feeling the financial pressure that so many leaders are under, I want you to know I'm giving away my $5,000 program called Long Path Creator Academy completely free. It's not about becoming an influencer. It's about stewarding your God-given wisdom in a way that serves people and supports your family. You can find that link in the show notes as well. And lastly, I want to give a quick thank you to Faith Made for supporting this podcast. They build simple, church-focused websites and tools that remove tech stress so pastors can focus on people, not platforms. Their link is also in the show notes. And if this podcast is serving you and you want to help us continue creating spaces like this for shepherds, I want to encourage you. You can become a monthly Long Path media partner at markcasto.co/donate. That's markcasto.co/donate. Guys, no pressure, just gratitude. Guys, let's come back to where we were. Let's jump right back in. Up to this point, we've named what's broken: the guilt, the pressure, the cost, the pace that's crushing too many shepherds. But I don't want to end this episode by just naming the problem. I want to offer a better blueprint, not a formula, not a system, not another thing to manage. A way of life. So let me say this clearly, okay? This blueprint is not about leaving ministry. Let me say it this way. It's not about burning everything down. It's not about rejecting sacrifice or responsibility. It's about reordering your life around Jesus instead of demand and urgency. See, most pastors don't need a new calling. They need a new center of gravity. And everything begins here. Not with output, not with vision, not with leadership strategies, with union. Union says you're already loved. You are already secure. You are already held. You don't lead toward union, okay? You lead from it. And when union is the center, prayer becomes communion, not preparation. Rest becomes trust, not laziness. Limits become wisdom, not failure. A shepherd's primary gift is not productivity. It's bringing people into the presence of God. It's presence. Presence with God, your spouse, your children, your people. Presence slows anxiety. Presence restores trust. Presence heals more than sermons ever could. And presence requires margin. Guys, your marriage is not a distraction for ministry. It is ministry. Your children are not obstacles to calling. They are disciples entrusted to you. A shepherd who loses his family while serving God has misunderstood both. See, a healthy blueprint, it protects time, attention, emotional availability, joy, not perfectly, but intentionally. A better blueprint allows for honest conversations about provision, creative stewardship of wisdom, sustainable income streams, freedom from constant anxiety. Guys, this isn't about access or excess. It's about peace. And this blueprint embraces fewer meetings, deeper relationships, longer timelines, smaller, healthier yeses, courageous no's. It trusts that fruit grows best at human speed. And guys, we're entering a season where people are exhausted. We're not entering into a season. We are in a season where people are exhausted. Institutions are shaking. trust is fragile, anxiety is high. Guys, the world does not need louder pastors. It needs anchored shepherds, men and women who know how to dwell with God and help others do the same. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I want this, but I don't know where to start small. Start honest. Start by slowing your breathing. Guys, let me say this to you. You are not behind. You are not failing. You are not invisible. You are a shepherd, and shepherds matter. See, the church does not need pastors who burn brightly for a season and burn out. It needs shepherds who last, who love deeply, who lead wisely, who live fully. Guys, this is the shepherd's tent. And this is a place to learn how to lead from rest, not rush. Guys, I'll see you in the next episode.